All right, I'm actually really excited about this little video. I've got to put a little bit of thought on into it. I am specifically responding to a comment from my last video where I introduced some of what I was writing about. And the comment that was left had to do with how do you know, or how did you know, when you were really ready to go ahead and write something. I think a lot of us want to write something and have had plenty of ideas, but just weren't sure how to take those next steps. And I think, I've always wanted to write something to, it's just one of those big goals I've had since probably junior high school. And I think my first real attempt, which I call it a real attempt, but it really wasn't, maybe about 20 years ago. I was about 20, and I got out a piece of paper. I just finished reading a book and thought, oh, that was a great book. Now I want to write something. And it ended up being just basically a rip-off of that book for the first few pages. And I thought, I don't really have an idea here. I don't have a plan. I haven't put any thought into it. I don't know the world this is taking place in, and just didn't have anything. Now, since then, I've been doing, I spent a little bit of time trying to develop this other board game a while ago, about 10 years ago, and I was writing lore for it and kind of writing these more like a Silmarillion style kind of backstory of this fantasy, and I thought, why am I doing this board game when I suck at game design and I could just focus on this lore part? Anyway, what I would say, because there definitely is an answer when I felt I was ready to start writing. Now, I think you can always be developing something. I think really it's just a matter of sitting down and getting one of these things to develop. Either develop the world, develop a character, develop some sort of plot, develop something. And as you start doing that, you will be surprised how quickly you can get tons and tons and tons of ideas that help to kind of give a foundation to that thing you are developing. Now, I wasn't exactly sure what that meant when I started. As I mentioned in my last video, I started with this idea of one dopey guy who doesn't get out much. I made him like a hyper sensationalized version of kind of the dopey dad that I do for my kids. When I'm the only guy in the house, so I just do dopey boy energy sometimes, like kind of leaning into it. And I made this character who's kind of like that. Think of somebody who really into old 80s movies. Think of like Johnny Lawrence from Cobra Kai. Just kind of stuck in his own element, doesn't do much else, and sort of that sort of energy. And I had this this idea that he gets a knock on the door. He opens the door, nobody's there. He looks down, there's this dusty old leather tome, which is kind of like a Brothers Grimm sort of set of old stories. And, kind of like a never-ending story sort of thing. He gets pulled into it and he has this whole stupid adventure, but then he gets thrown back out and he finds out that really the world that he's now in is more, it's been kind of, he's going to discover that it's a lot more like that Brothers Grimm sort of thing than he realizes. So it was kind of going to be like an urban regular world like we had, but injected with this new thing. And when he got back there, he had this long, stupid hair that wouldn't stop growing. and it was just ridiculous and wouldn't break off and stuff. And I mentioned, that it was just a stupid idea. But the main focus was I wanted to make people laugh, make my kids laugh. This was going to be a book for them. And so I had moments where he would get in these stupid kind of entanglements with his hair. He'd he'd get stuck in a blender and start screaming. And I don't, just, it was dumb. It was so stupid. But it kind of evolved where I thought, okay, well, I need to have some characters around this guy. Does he have a neighbor? Does he have some fears? And I'll just let you know here, it doesn't give anything away because where it's gone is definitely not this. I decided that his neighbor would be Frankenstein's monster, but kind of like the Wilson in Home Improvement. He didn't really get a full look at his face. It was shadowy. He would only kind of come out at night, so he knew he was this hulking, freaky figure, but he just kind of, yeah. And this Frankenstein would be super nice, and but would kind of keep back to not freak him out. And that's kind of where it was. And it would have this big adventure where he eventually wanted to get out and climb this mountain and have this hilarious sort of thing that happened later on. And also I had this river where people across the river. This was early on when I didn't know how to really properly develop something, but I was still really thinking about it. Had this river where across it was very much like a gothic horror kind of place where you don't go over there because if you go over there you can't come out, and it's just a bad place to be, and it had this duality nature. And then as I was starting to get more into some of these moments and develop these scenes and things, I thought I want to do this properly. I've always been comfortable with my writing and essays, and I loved doing short stories, and I've always written. But yeah, I wanted, if I was going to do this, I wanted to do it properly. And the further I got into it, I thought, this isn't going to be just a goofy kids thing. I want to do something that has some meaning behind it or whatever. So I watched some of those Brandon Sanderson lectures. I watched some things on filmmaking and storytelling through film and just that kind of thing. I started to break down the right types of questions to ask in regards to certain characters, certain promises that you want to give about this character, and some that would kind of let you know what sort of arc they're going to undertake, and some of their vulnerabilities and some of their strengths and some of the things that they really need to experience, even if it's not specific scenes, the types of things that they need to experience to have those resonant kind of moments. So as I was starting to ask those things, and I could do a long video specifically about the questions. I know I've done that sort of in the past, but specifically about the questions I ask about my characters, minor or major, about the plot and subplots, the world building. And as I was starting to do that, ask these different things, I was seeing that, it was much easier to grow all these different things. It came at a rate that was like almost too much. You start to almost get this fire hose at times of things that you could add, but it's just so many things that would just be inconsistent to other ideas and da 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 da. But as I was doing that, I still didn't really have anything. But I was developing this different world that has slowly become kind of what it is now. Even though there are funny moments, it's much more in the style of some of the books that I really love, that are a little bit darker, but have moments that can, anyway. So I was developing this thing, and when I started to realize I had something that I wanted to write about, specifically wasn't based on the types of action or these big set pieces, even though that was kind of a part of it. There are some big scenes that I thought that would be so cool if something like that happened. Like, I'm a big fan of the monster of the week sort of thing. I used to read comic books and I loved great action sequences in movies, but that still wasn't enough to drive a book for me, even though I thought I want to have these kinds of scenes. What finally got me there to thinking, yes, I have something worth writing, even if I don't have all the set pieces or all the, I should say, the plot from A to Z. It was when I finally started to get some emotional resonance with these characters that I had grown to kind of love by contemplating them, writing down little moments for each of them, types of things that they could kind of experience together and alone. And as I was starting to have those moments with them where I really was starting to feel something, even if it was just having a single scene that I didn't know how they would get there or where they would go after, but this type of scene, I thought, if I can hold on to some of these moments, I can build around that and I can begin to really flesh this out. And as I started to hold on to those moments that meant something, that's when the world building and the plot storytelling really went into overdrive. And it was as I really made it focused on these emotional, I mean, not emotional like crying, but these impactful scenes around the character and the characters. Now, some of the ways that I got to those was by continuing to read other great books. One of my favorite books is The Count of Monte Cristo. So as I was reading that, even though it's not like The Count of Monte Cristo, there was some stuff where I saw some of that, some little elements with certain characters where I thought that would be, as I was reading these other books, I would have my character still in my mind, and I would think some of those things could kind of echo or fit well with some of the things that my characters were going through. And this example of how we got here really would work well. And maybe if I could have a character that would kind of be like this character and it would balance out. And I know Faithful and the Fallen was a great one to read at one point, that quartet. And there were plenty of emotionally resonant moments that, even though won't be like mine, just reading great books is so important to find out what great storytelling is like, and to find some of that secret sauce. And as I was continuing to read, and I would read other things, but as I was reading something, sometimes mid-chapter, I would put that book down and start to kind of write some notes. Sometimes things that had nothing to do with what I was reading, but just kind of was enough of a spark to really develop more. I don't know if that was a really vague way of putting this, but I would say, just to kind of shorten it up, even though we're already at the end here, I always wanted to develop. I had to learn some proper things to kind of ask myself, like with character arcs. But when I started to finally understand a couple of these characters and love a couple of these characters and find them impactful, it became so much easier to build something around them. And that was when I knew, okay, now I have something that is worth writing. You could make Middle-earth, and you could make the Silmarillion, and you could have something great, but until you have Gandalf and Frodo and Bilbo and Sam and Aragorn, until you have these characters that you love and you really know what kind of thing that they're going to go through. Until you have them, you don't have really, in my opinion, and and I haven't written anything from start to finish, so take it with a grain of salt. But without your characters and knowing what they mean to you, I think you're still in that development stage, and you're always in the development stage. But again, I'll just say, as when I started to really feel something for these characters is when I thought, okay, now I'm ready to really take this seriously and decide to go forward with this and make it happen. So, hope that answered your question in a long roundabout way, but it was my honest take. So, I'll talk to you on the next one. Bye.